Good morning, students. Once again, we are here for the online classes. We have already started a new chapter, that is world population, distribution, density, and growth. So, we'll continue with that chapter, that is world population, distribution, density, and growth. Yesterday, we had already discussed about the distribution of population. We have seen to discuss about the distribution of population, we need to know the density of population and how the density of population is not even, rather it varies unevenly distributed all over the countries, all over the world. Even in small areas, we find population is extremely large, and in extremely large areas, we have seen, we discussed earlier, that population is very small. Now today we are going to discuss about the next, that is population growth. What does the word population growth means? It refers to the change. Population growth refers to the change in number of inhabitants in an area in a specific period. It means population growth refers to the number of people between two time periods. It is measured in two ways. We can measure the natural growth of population, as well as we can measure the absolute or the actual growth. The actual growth. So now the question comes, what do you mean by the natural growth of population? When we talk about the natural growth of population, we take into account two components. One is birth, the total number of births in that region, and the total number of deaths. Whatever difference we get between these two, that is the natural growth of population. If you talk about the actual growth, these are the two components, birth as well as death. These are also known as the components of population change. Now if we talk about the actual growth of population, birth and death cannot give you the exact number of actual growth of population, because there is one third factor along with this, that is migration. It means to get actual growth, you have to first take the birth and the difference between the birth and death. Then you add it with in migration with out migration. Why do we want to know the growth of population? Or why do we want to know the change in population? Because whenever you will see the change in population, the change of population can be in terms of a positive growth of population, or it can be negative growth of population. What is positive growth of population? If birth are more than death, we say that country has a positive growth along with more of in migration than out migration. We say negative growth of population when deaths are more than birth and out migration is more than in migration. So these are the terms which you will get in the book, which you should know when you are discussing about the population change. The first thing is, what do you mean by population change, or what is population growth? It refers to the number of change in the number of inhabitants in an area in a specific period, because it will always be having two time periods. We will compare it with two time periods. It can be a natural growth of population when we take only the birth and death in a specific region. We call it a natural growth of population. When we take the birth and death along with the migration component, we call it the actual growth rate. So birth and death can give you a positive growth if birth are more and in migration is more. It can give a negative growth also if deaths are more or out migration is more. If you remember, India had faced this negative growth of population in one period of time when there was a huge out migration. The country was divided between India and Pakistan and India and Bangladesh, and there was huge out migration from the country, and we found that we had a negative growth of population. So this was all about the population growth. Now the second topic, why we are studying population growth? Because population growth of a region or a change in a population growth in a region will help us to know about the process of economic development in that region. It will also give us a clear picture of the cultural and historical background of that region. Now we go to the components. We discuss the components of population change. As we have just seen that there are three components. What are the components? Of population change. There are three components of population change, as we have just now seen. One is birth, one is death, and the third one is migration. Number of birth is measured in terms of crude birth rate, and number of death is measured in terms of crude death rate. You will read the book, you will get the formula of crude birth rate is BI divided by P into 1000, that is live births. P refers to mid-year population. In the same way, crude death rate is death divided by population into 1000. So this is the way we measure birth rate and death rate. We need to know the birth rate of a region because it gives us a picture regarding the fertility rate of a region. We need to know the death rate because it gives us a picture regarding the mortality rate. Let's talk about the birth rate. Different countries, it has been noticed that there is difference in birth rate. Some countries they have a very high birth rate. Some countries they have a very low zero point 0.5 or 0.2, 0.3 children per woman as birth rate. And in some countries, if you talk about high birth rate, sub-African countries like Uganda, Burundi, Namibia, you will find each woman has 8 or 9 children. So the birth rate is 7.8 children per woman. So birth rate, it is a very important factor to know about the birth rate because it helps the government to frame the policies. If you have more, or if the fertility rate is very high, if the birth rate is very high, the government has to be prepared for providing education for this coming population. Once they finish the education, government has to prepare policies and create jobs for this growing population. Not only this, it will also have an impact on our environment with the high birth rate. For example, regarding the birth rate, one very famous thing which you have heard is China's one child policy, which ended in 2015. When it started one child policy, because China's population was increasing tremendously, so Chinese government, it thought of bringing a change in the society by introducing the concept of one child policy. And do you know what happened to this one child policy? With the course of time, because it was abortions were made legal, it became, instead of one child policy, one son policy. China had maximum sex selective abortions in the country because everyone wanted to have a son. So you can see how the policies of the government gets affected with the birth rate. There are some countries, which the western countries, where you will see that the government is favoring birth rate. Government wants to increase the birth rate. For example, Australia, they are giving 3,000 Australian dollar to each couple, that is a baby bonus in their country, to increase the population. In 2011, Myanmar, it was under military junta. So they needed a huge population labor force for their country. So they made it a policy of the government was that women should produce as many number of children they can, because it will help the country to have a large workforce, to have a large labor force, which will help the country for army. So in this way we see that the birth rate is differing from one region to another. Iran. Before the Iran and Iraq war, the birth rate was 8 children per woman. But today, that is after 2010 and 11, it has been noticed the birth rate has reduced to 1.06 children per woman. And it is all because of westernization. Under the influence of westernization, women has realized the importance of having a small family, and they have reduced the number of children in their family. Now, you can make out that how birth rate is so important. The places where birth rate is extremely high, you will be able to create a picture of that region. The socio-economic conditions can be clearly understood by the birth rate. Birth rate is high, it means the standard of living of people is very low. With low standard of income, the low standard of living, it means income is very low. If income is very low, it means there is a huge malnutrition among the people. So in this way, each and every factor is related with other factors. So it is very important to know the birth rate of a country, of a region, to frame the policies. Now we come to the death rate. Death rate gives you, death rate can be measured in different ways, because we have infant mortality rates, we have prenatal mortality rates, postnatal mortality rates. So mortality rate gives you the picture of the number of deaths in a society. Amartya Sen, one of the famous economists who got a Nobel Prize, the Indian economist, he said that death rate can give you the picture of the success of the economic development, or the economic development has failed. So you can imagine that how birth rate and death rate can give you information about a particular society in such a manner. Now we talk to the last one, migration. What does migration means? Migration refers to the movement of people. But when we say movement of people, always remember you cannot write only the word movement of people. It should include change in residence, that is from the place of origin to place of destination. Migration is also an important component which brings a lot of change in any country or any region. Let's see how. Migration can be in migration